So tonight, I have this most interesting spin to offer the subject of the cafe in Japan. I would like to look at the history, as we were instructed to do, on the cafe and why the cafe, why coffee in Japan. But I also want to specialize tonight on the food of the cafe. Not too many people talk about the oddities that have come to Japan through the Kissaten, or cafe. American coffee houses are missing something, and it is spaghetti, and curry, and pilaf, and creme caramel, and salad for breakfast. When you pick up a dusty scone or a dry biscotto in an American cafe, you should put it right down again, and you should head to a Japanese cafe. Good coffee deserves good food, and nowhere is coffee more associated with interesting and fabled food than in Japan. Since their beginnings, Japanese cafes have had innovative menus and have acted as windows on the world of culinary possibility and invention. Key to this discussion will be the background thought on what is yoshoku and what is washoku. These are words that are tossed around in the study of Japanese food. What is Western food? Yoshoku is commonly used, at least in the Meiji period, to refer to the Western foods that were coming to Japan. And what is Japanese food? And when and where and why does the line get drawn between these things? In 1898, a commentator, Ishii Jihei, said, "Yoshoku is Japanese food. Western food is Japanese food," in 1898. So after a time, it's a matter of choice, it's a matter of an opinion, it's a matter of making your own, carving your own turf amid all of these interesting foods that are always on the move. After a time, exotic migrant foodways become ordinary, and the foreign becomes domestic. Think about pizza. How many people think pizza is Italian? So, yoshoku, this Western-influenced food, does become something indigenous, Japanese, even if it might be written in katakana, the syllabary that's used for foreign borrowed words. We're going to talk about that a little later, but let's go to the cafes first. Cafes, as novel places in the 19th century in Japan, could introduce other novel things. They were new, the food was new, and there was no official pairing of coffee with some kind of food. There was nothing that said, you have to have this with your coffee. No one said curry doesn't go with coffee. It does. The foods, like the beverage, helped create the demand for these places, and trying out the new social space meant trying new tastes. The cafes were the obvious places then for novelties. They were kind of laboratories and showcases for culinary, cultural, social, and personal experiments. They have served many functions over the decades and, 130 years, let's say, that cafes have appeared in Japan, and they began to change the urban experience. The cafe, the railroad station, the hotel lobby, these were new places to learn new ways of being. They were not places where you would regularly encounter predictable, familiar people. Of course, there were older gathering spaces where everybody knows your name, and they still exist, like the temple grounds in a neighborhood, the shotengai, or market street. Much older, familiar spaces also included what was called the chaya, the tea house. Now, the chaya did not turn into a kissaten or cafe. They were really kind of different spaces. The cafe, though, was not the village square. Rather, it was the urban plaza, where you could see outlandish things. You could be a different person yourself, and you could meet people you never would have met otherwise. as you ingested food and drink that you had never had. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I began field work on coffee houses in Japan. It was about time, considering how much time I had been sitting in them for many decades, so it was time to put my work where my coffee was. It was tough. I tried out chairs and brews and tables, and I tried the patience of the barmen who put up with all my questions. It's not as easy as it sounds. There's much more in the cup of coffee than beans and water. When I first started sitting in cafes, of course, it was much, much earlier than when I decided to make them my study. In fact, it was just at the beginning of the post-war climb to economic success in Japan. And cafes were then, this was the 1960s, launch pads for the hard work of Reconstruction. They were also respite from the hard work of Reconstruction. They were what were called third spaces then and now too, where the roles and responsibility of home and work or school and home do not apply, and where, as one businessman told me, you can do nothing at all. Isn't that wonderful? So the place of purpose is also the place of no purpose. Well, for the sake of simplicity, I'm saying café a lot, but these other words are used. Kissaten, kohi hausu is sometimes used as a very kind of older locution. The very first cafe was called kahi chakan, and that was, it had the word kahi, which is now changed to kohi, coffee, but it also had cha, the word for tea, the character for tea, and kan, the establishment. So it became a beverage place generically, but it very quickly became only coffee. Kohi hausu is sometimes still used kind of nostalgically, and Kissaten is one type of space, but for the purposes of not having to explain each time what I'm talking about, I'm just going to say cafe, but we'll get particular too. So cafe, the first coffee houses chain, the first chain coffee houses in Japan were established in 1907. That is actually when the first coffee chain anywhere was established. So Japan was first in creating chain coffee house, and that was called Café Paulista. And Paulista was the name because of Sao Paulo, where the coffee was coming from in Brazil. So Paulista still remains, and it took on very interesting connotations. The Brazilian-influenced cafes by the Taisho period, 1912 to 1926, were more cabaret-like. They had, after all, music like jazz, they had alcohol, and they had the jokyu. Jokyu are the often mentioned in modern literature, very eroticized often, but they were also fashion plates. They took the place of the geisha as the fashion-forward people. And their kimono in Art Deco patterns, their hairdos in Western style. I will make a plug for my book, the cover of which indeed has one of these jokyu who has her hair done up in a Western bun kind of head, I don't know what to call that, kind of pompadour. But, well, if you see the book, out there I believe there's some cards that show the book cover. You can take one if you want. But she was, one person said, the reason to be in a cafe. The coffee may not have been that great, the music too, but you came because of the jokyu. But in answer or reaction to these noisy, trendy places of the 19-teens, there were quieter, more contemplative places established called pure cafes, or junkisa. The junkisa had no alcohol and no fashion-forward women, and that no one would be distracted by these external things. It was about the coffee. It was also about a place to go to be quiet, to be internal, or as one person said, a place to be private in public. So writers, readers, poets, and political thinkers. Often some of the denizens were also avant-garde women, often feminists. Stories about them, if you want them later. But just to say that these early versions of what we now call Kissaten or cafés have their descendants today too, and many more novel types. I'm not going to talk about maid cafes or cat cafes, but only if you really want to. But I will start with the story of the very first Tokyo cafe, which was the one I mentioned earlier called Kahi-chakan. This cafe was begun by a young man who had been born in Nagasaki to a Chinese father, and he was thought to need something more to get ahead in Japan. So his father sent him to Yale University in New Haven in the 1870s. And he, I was a little later than that. By the time he got there, it would be 1875. His name, transliterated in Japanese, was Te-Eike. He was later given the name Nishimura Tsurukichi. But Te-Eike wasn't very keen on his studies at Yale. He much preferred the coffee houses of New York, so he spent most of his time in New York or commuting to New York and just hanging out in these big, sprawling, leather-chaired, comfortable, clubby, very masculine environments. He flunked out. He didn't make it. So his father gave him another chance, said, all right, you've got to do something with yourself. Come home the slow way. Go spend time in Europe and make something of yourself. Learn something. So in London, he did exactly the same thing. He spent all his time in the flourishing coffee houses of London and returned to Japan, eager to introduce the style and function of these clubby, male, leather arm-chaired cafes. So now, the time when he was returning to Japan in the 1880s, the old class system had been abolished at the beginning of the Meiji period, and Te-Eike wanted to make a democratic space where merchants and former samurai and aristocrats might hobnob and get to know each other. So he founded in 1888 the Kahi-chakan, and it was very beloved. Everybody wanted to be there, males mostly. And men would come and park themselves there all day, playing billiards, writing letters. There was a nap place where you could lie down and have a nap, all for the price of 1 cup of coffee for a whole day. So he went broke. He was thinking too much of pleasing the customers. He was thinking like a customer. He wasn't thinking like a businessman. So he went broke, had to close down, and other tragedies befell him, and on the brink of suicide, he was found by a friend who sent him to seek his coffee fortunes in Seattle. You probably recognize the allusion. His decline there, though, is even sadder. He died there penniless at 35 years of age, selling coffee in a dry goods store. And he's buried there under his Japanese name of Nishimura. But the cafes flourished in Japan and went on to great popularity. Coffee is the leading publicly consumed beverage in Japan. I'm usually asked, what about green tea? Well, of course, but as one Japanese culinary historian said, green tea is like breathing the air. It's so expected, while coffee is on purpose. That purposefulness drives the high standards of bean purchase and roasting in Japan and the high consumption of coffee overall in Japan. It's the 3rd highest in the world after the US and Germany. And we can talk about what that actually breaks down as being. Only one cafe that I know of serves green tea. They often serve black tea or Western roasted tea. And this place is in Shimbashi, I think, in Tokyo. And it only is served as an act of welcome. The waitress brings you the glass of cold water, the oshibori, the nice wet cloth, and the coffee menu, along with a handleless cup of Nihoncha, green tea. So you're supposed to sip the hospitable tea while you choose your coffee from the coffee menu, which shows that these are not overlapped beverages. These are distinct. That one means hospitality, the other is why you came. So they're quite different. The significance of Japanese coffee, the development of techniques and technologies for coffee are now making a strong impact on the rest of the world. Here in New York, if you have been to High Collar in the East Village, I know we have a representative here, they make excellent coffee, and they refer very much to the Taisho period, and that style, high collar, meant the high collar that young dandies would wear. Excuse me, I'm bringing the pollen of Boston with me. So the very many places use Japanese techniques and Japanese technologies to make coffee, even if they don't explicitly refer to it. The siphon is a Japanese method that was actually brought to Japan in 1740 through Europe, and is now so popular in Japan that there is a siphonista contest, along with, barista, latte art, and other things. But these things have made coffee in Japan rather special, rather different, and very important. Well, let's get to those foods I promised. Cafes introduced many foreign foods to Japan. Foreign, I'm using quotation marks around that, because they didn't stay foreign long. We find many of these foreign borrowed foods have been so long in Japan that they are assimilated. Yoshoku, we mentioned that word before, was usually used to mean the foods that arrived during the Meiji period and after, not the ones originally brought by the Portuguese and other early arrivals in the 1500s. So those foods, as you probably know, are thoroughly assimilated. Portuguese missionaries and traders introduced deep-fried foods, tempura, tonkatsu, anything breaded and deep-fried, and I'll ask Elizabeth Ando to check me on this later, has its roots in those early borrowings. And then, of course, the castella, the sponge cake that everybody recognizes as Japanese, it came from Castile. And, of course, pan. The Portuguese word for bread is pão. So we have the basis for a lot of the cafe food right there. And of course, there were borrowings from the Asian mainland. Sushi, ramen, tofu, hot pot dishes like sukiyaki, and more recently, kimchi, which is very popular now in Japan. Some of these can be seen as now arrivals. Whether they can be called washoku depends on the purity of the concept you use to describe what washoku means. Washoku recently has been made, by the way, a World Heritage cuisine by UNESCO, and including some of these early layers of domesticated imports. Food has always been on the move everywhere. So when my students ask me what foods are authentic, and I always raise the rabbit ears and do this irritating ironies. And when they ask me, were traditional foods available? I always have to bite my tongue and try to think what level of an answer I'm supposed to give here. Authentic usually is in the mind or desires of the beholder, and unless you are referring to your grandmother's recipe for something, well, you need the authority behind the idea. Traditional, like authentic, well, that seems important to people too. The more people and foods move. And people seem to develop a need for traces to a past, or at least uses of what are considered our culinary principles. In Japan, the invocation of season, of region, and of course the best possible ingredients in the making of new foods. Well, some of the adaptations of Western foods do engage touchstone ideas from Japanese culinary lore. I'm going to give you a very unlikely example. Kit Kat bars. Well, nobody's going to call them washoku. They're not going to be seen as Japanese, but they are. They follow the principles of regionality and seasonality. Can't account for the best possible ingredients part, I'm afraid. With Hokkaido versions of Kit Kat bars made with red beans, pink sakura ones for the cherry blossom season, and the uji green tea Kit Kat bars. You probably have seen some of these. I think they were available here. But this is an extreme example of the engagement of certain kinds of principles in a food that is so absolutely clearly not a conventional food in Japanese terms. Well, driving the consumption of some of the foods that I have mentioned in the cafe and will expand on, a lot of the first market for these foreign foods in cafes were young women who frequented the cafes as possibly socially acceptable places for young women to be. But some of them were more kind of racy, and there were, of course, the moga and mobo, or modern girl and modern boy, who hung out in cafes and might be more flapperish or lounge lizardish, so they would be slightly different as a category of taster. Other foods, the foods that young women particularly appropriated were the sweet foods, like what we call creme caramel or pudding, which is a very early one, or kohi jedi, coffee jelly, which is, I have some slides later to show you all these delectable goods. Other foods were savory and were introduced as snacks because they didn't fit the existing template of what a meal would be. A meal, of course, would have to have rice and maybe miso soup and pickles, but these were just dishes or snacks, and they fell into an anomalous category. Now, early feminist writers who moved from cafe to cafe in the 1920s reported eating plate after plate of one particular food that was mentioned over and over again, hayashi rice. Now, hayashi rice, some say, there's dispute over what hayashi means. Some say it means hache from the French chop, and some say a cook named Hayashi invented it. But it's a beef stew with chopped meat and mushrooms and wine. Another dish that they report on is pilaf. Now, the rice that's used to be served with hayashi rice, or the pilaf, or for that matter, the kare rice, curry rice, is always, they always use the word rice, raisu. They don't use the word gohan, which you would be used if the rice were to be served in a Japanese meal. And that's very interesting. It might even be the same rice, but you would call it raisu because it was with this foreign borrowed food. Another food, let me talk for a minute about curry rice. I'm surely going to run out of time, but kare raisu's history, curry rice, is really interesting. It is not an Indian curry ladled over a mound of white rice. It is an English derivation of an Indian curry. Its first migration was through the colonials of the Raj, ruling in India, but in England it softened and sweetened and took on the texture of a thick yellowy sauce like the brown sauces served with an English roast. In England, as later in Japan, it became very useful as an inexpensive food to serve to large groups of people, namely the military. The services, after all, in England drew young men from all over the British Isles, and serving food of one British region would be prejudicial to the others. Curry, Britishized, could serve all and favor none. When the Japanese Navy encountered it, it became their food as well, not to favor one of Japan's diverse regional foodways, but also to have an inexpensive food that could please everyone. Another dish that came to the cafe, as well as kare rice, is nikuchaga. Now, nikuchaga is a meat and potato dish often served with konnyaku, which is translated, I think wrongly, as yam cake. And it's served over rice too. Now it's interesting that duplication of what we would consider, double starches is frequently seen. The nikuchaga was supposedly invented by chefs in the Imperial Japanese Navy with these English derivations from the British Royal Navy. Now, what's interesting now is 2 towns in Japan, both formerly Imperial Navy bases, compete over who was the inventing town of this Britishized beef stew. So Maizuru, near Kyoto, and Kureishi, near Hiroshima, both claim that they were the first place where this was invented. Seems very important, even if the product's roots are not local, for local pride to want to grab it. Other cafe dishes came from the experiences of Japanese artists and writers who went to France to broaden their own cultural grand tour. Gratin, and doria, in signature oval baking dishes, were represented with other cafe foods in the wax or later fiberglass and silicone models of foods sitting in the glass case of every establishment. Gratin was French in origin. It was a casserole, gratinade and breadcrumbed, and doria. Now, somebody can help me with the origin of doria, but it is a rice casserole with a bechamel sauce, and cheese, and possibly containing chicken or shrimp or other items. Again, roast baked on top. In the cafes in the 1920s, spaghetti became a standard food, but made with ketchup, and accompanied by the little green cardboard cylinder, Kraft's grated Parmesan, which was a staple in Japan as it was here. It was first created here, of course, in the 1920s. They had that little green cylinder that far back. Tomato sauce was not yet popular in Japan, though ketchup was. The distinctive foods that changed because of the war, I want to mention that too. During the war, Kissaten, or cafes, stayed open as long as they possibly could, even after there was the last finding of coffee beans was a German warehouse that was broken into, where the coffee beans had been stored. But even when those were gone, people would make an ersatz coffee out of leaves and burnt nuts, or just something brown, offering sometimes just hot water and maybe senbei or rice crackers. And more importantly, a place to gather in and check in with each other and feel connected. But after the war, during the Allied occupation, red sauce Italian really took off, appearing like with other pastas too. Italian American red sauce, not Italian red sauce. And dishes that never appear in Italy, like spaghetti meatball, appeared in Japan because of the GIs. Pizza, too, served now in some cafes, though the certified real Naples pizza has only recently made a landing, not in cafes, but in special shops accredited by the Associazione Verace Pizza Napoletana, whose emblem is on the door of the approved shop. So you have a trend to get the real thing. Other cafe foods, though, cheese toast. Yeah, cheese toast. Lovers of grilled cheese sandwiches love these very Japanese versions made of the shokupan thick toast and the processed cheese many of us may remember from our own Kraft Velveeta melted childhoods. Sandwiches came in through cafes as easy-to-manage snack foods, becoming, in the process, Japanese. Crusts cut off, Kewpie mayonnaise, the perfect slice of ham, and the lettuce that tidily stayed within the bread. Other versions similarly perfected were yakisoba sandwiches. This again, the duplication of starches. You've got noodles in a sandwich. Pork cutlet sandwich, I think you are getting some later. The katsusando. The potato salad sandwich, another duplication. Fruit sandwich. Egg sandwich. It's interesting, this random seeming inclusion of certain ingredients in sandwiches. It's a why not situation. Why not put it between slices of bread? Since, as I said, there was no official template of what a sandwich was officially supposed to be. Why not? In home kitchens, you began to see things that appeared first in the cafes, like Worcestershire sauce, which was thickened with fruit and vegetable purees in Japan. Ketchup, of course. Mayonnaise, yes. And later, a little later, Tabasco, available in every convenience store, added to the creative possibilities for the home cook as well as the cafe. The other thing that changed what was available was rising affluence and the increased use of things like refrigerators after the war, and new home technologies such as ovens. Most people didn't have ovens until fairly recently in Japan. It wasn't really until the 1970s that Japanese middle-class kitchens began to have ovens and the capacity to bake cakes. So American marketers trying to sell things like Duncan Hines cake mixes designed them to be baked, that is steamed, in the electric rice cooker. This American marketing ploy, seemingly sensitive to Japanese available technologies, was culturally off. Housewives did not want to use their rice cookers for anything but rice, considering that anything else made in it might impart taste or smell to the rice, which of course should be absolutely pure. So there remained some boundaries of taste and culture in food. Adaptability is not infinite. Now, there are a few other things to talk about in the eating of these foods that are sort of, maybe chuto hampa, not this or not that. Oops, I'm doing something here. Let's keep it there. How you eat, what kinds of things you use to eat. Do you use your hand? Do you use a fork? Do you use chopsticks? What, for example, do you use for eating kare raisu? Well, when it entered the cafes, a spoon. It's a foreign food. You eat it with a spoon. So, or the other raisu, the pilaf, those other rices are eaten with spoons, not chopsticks, even if the rice is actually Japanese. Sweets, is this, again, something where there is a meal to be ended with a sweet? No. As in most Asian cuisines, Japanese menus do not contain officially a dessert until recently, in the American or European sense. Now at pastry shops or cafes, you will have certainly sweets for all times of day. But sensing the need for a category called dessert on the menu in Asian restaurants in the United States, in the 1920s, green tea ice cream was invented in California. It went back to Japan then. And vaguely Asian ice creams were also included in the California Asian dessert menu, ginger ice cream. The things that are popular now, though, have been traveling back and forth for some time. Sweets in the Japanese cafes, the coffee jelly I mentioned earlier. Some of the foods served here, I don't want to appear to be advertising, but High Collar here in New York does serve the fruits sando, coffee jelly, parfaits, period pieces now. Taisho period pieces, rather lovingly maintained. Another much beloved item of the Japanese cafe might be seen as a dessert because it can be sweetened. It's a performance in itself, and it's iced coffee. Not necessarily a cold brew, which you see now in advanced cafes, but a tall glass of iced coffee accompanied by a very small pitcher of very heavy cream and a small pitcher of sugar syrup to go with it. The initiated know to pour the cream very slowly, and it trickles down through the ice and elegantly falls in supple winding lines through the dark brew. The sugar syrup is poured in as well. Many of my colleagues, in a rough poll, and some of you are in the audience, of longtime Japan goers remember this in the heat of a Japanese summer as a sublime pleasure. The transport of taste is not a one-way phenomenon. you have to consider that the flow of Japanese foods overseas as another form of Japan's soft power. There are some curious transmutations that have happened during these moves back and forth. The story of Benihana of Tokyo? Benihana was created by a gentleman, Japanese-American, named Raki Aoki. And Aoki-san created Benihana of Tokyo for Americans, a teppanyaki-style grill, a style of food which was made for America. When he discovered that Japanese tourists here were enjoying going to this exotic place that didn't resemble what they had at home at all, he decided, well, maybe we can take this American food to Japan. And indeed, Benihana of New York opened in Japan. So it's wonderful stuff. What do you say? Now, I want to return to the Japanese cafe, though. We note that the foods most associated with the beginnings of cafe foodways can be had now in a lot of places, but I want to go back to that informal poll I took of many people and say that among America's leading Japan specialists, the winning cafe edible seems to be morning seto, or morning sabisu, the breakfast foods of the cafe. So morning set, it's established in Japanese cafes. It's very Japanese. It was an offering to bring people to the cafe, a kind of bonus to go with your coffee. It was a bit of breakfast. In keeping with the modern spirit of the cafe, it was not miso soup and pickles and rice. It was a very simple interpretation of a Western breakfast, a piece or two of toast, a hard-boiled egg, a little salad, usually a chiffonade of cabbage or lettuce. It was almost free with your cup of coffee. The busy post-war salaryman family, the career woman, the traveler, the student or worker, without cooking facilities at home, had their morning needs met. Unlike other cafe offerings, morning set is a meal. A housewife preparing her children's bento would be grateful if her husband repaired to the cafe for a breakfast she had no time to make him. And the elderly person wanting a social moment would arrive at a cafe just before morning service ended, between 10 and 11, in some places allowing the inexpensive breakfast to act as their lunch. These morning sets are blossoming now and diversifying as destination meals. There are even morning set guidebooks and tours taking fans to the best of each city, and the winner for morning set is the city of Nagoya is quite famous for its morning sets. It has sumptuous cafe breakfasts called Nagoya Morning, which can include all manner of foods. Macaroni salad, or the famous potato salad, of course, breakfast meat, smoked fish, French toast, and a prize dish called Nagoya Ogura toast, covered with sweet azuki bean jam, accompanied by yogurt and topped with fresh fruit. But it is really about the toast. Cafe toast in Japan is spectacular. As one of those Japanologists said, if we are what we eat, we are all Japanese toast. Made of shokupan, which you probably have seen, often 2 inches or more high, it is toasted to a light brown crust, slightly caramelized, and the inside is soft and yielding. It is buttered and may be cut in what the British call toast soldiers, 1-inch wide sticks. But it is otherwise conforms to no model of toast in Europe or America. After the questions I get about coffee in Japan, I get questions like, why toast? Why has it become an iconic Japanese food? Why is there no better toast in the world, in my own opinion? We've talked about bread as pan, brought early on by the Portuguese. And indeed, there are much fancier artisanal loaves of multigrain bread available all over Japan now, just as there are perfect croissants, better than most in Paris, and fabulous French pastries. The morning set with the toast is what is savored in the memories of Japan-loving foreigners and Japanese living overseas. The toast has traveled, more of the soft power of Japanese cultural journeys, to mainland Asia now and to the US as well, where toast cafes emulate the morning toast in their own ways. There are places where they will allow you to choose a toaster of many different kinds of toasters laid out on a sideboard, and somebody will allow you to choose a toaster to bring to your table, and then you have the breads, and then you have the condiments or the things to put on them. So it becomes itself a kind of performance. Before I show you slides, I just want to end with where I began, with the nice contradictions in the movements of food and the educational power of that social space, that's public space for learning the past and the future. There is much nostalgia in Japan today for the oldest Kissaten, the ones that some people call sepia cafes, sepia-toned, kind of as if they were photographed in sepia. The nostalgia for those places also invokes the food, the pilaf, the omuraisu, the omelet over rice, and katsusando. If anybody saw Tampopo, I bet some people did, there's a scene where an old guy makes omuraisu for a little kid. And it's a very charming scene. It's a very loving food. It's a very kind of nurturant act. But it's also a nostalgic food. But cafes, you should watch out for the latest foods of the cafe. They keep changing. They're not just museums of older yoshoku. Change is constant, and I want you to know that the toast thing keeps morphing into other forms. One Japanese cafe has just added spicy miso mayo with mizuna leaves on their toast, confirming that toast is really, after all, Japanese. But what I would like to do now is give you some slides, and then maybe we could have some questions and discussion. Let me see now. What are you seeing? Okay. The first slide is the grave of that sad gentleman who started Japan's first cafe. The grave is in Seattle in the Lakeside Cemetery. So Japanese industry, coffee industry people pay pilgrimages to this grave, and there's a little handout in Japanese if you go to the Lakeview Cemetery. This one is a sepia, a brown cafe. Again, the kind of place where you would be private in public and have some, I think he's probably looking at his cell phone, but never mind that. The next is of the Portuguese cake that became super popular in Japan starting in the Meiji period, but it had been in Japan long before that because the Portuguese had brought it. It is a very simple sponge cake, but it is this sort of caramelization of the baked top of it that carries the power of the cake. Omuraisu, well, there it is with the ketchup design on top, which is kind of a standard issue, and is served with that spoon, you see. The rice inside will be eaten with the spoon. Katsusando, again, you have the delicate bread, crusts trimmed, and the fried cutlet inside. Katsu, by the way, is cutlet, and sando, sandwich. Now, spaghetti came to the cafe first, as I said, and it came as spaghetti Napolitan, again, with ketchup. Not sure about this one, whether it has ketchup or not. The strawberry cakes, as I said, were very popular, especially among young women, or older women as well. The strawberry cake, or a kind of version of strawberry shortcake, would be much more delicately prepared than the conventional American version. Pilaf, again, to be eaten with a spoon, was a very early entry into the cafe. And kare raisu, without which very many students would be starving. Toast. Now, cafes have their own styles. There is no one toast. So, and it can vary in ways that seem incredibly minute distinctions. This one is thick, and it has been caramelized with a salamander, a thing that you heat and then hold over something as well. And the next one is, and it's cut in a particular way. This one, it's actually in Kyoto on the Tetsugaku no Michi, the Philosopher's Walk. It's one of my favorite places. And they make a point of making sure that the inside is moist and soft while the outside is crispy. So everybody fetishizes their toast in one way or another. A very, very secretive bread maker in the heart of Tokyo, in a dusty lane where it's very hard to get to. There are directions in my book for getting there. Is a gentleman who works all alone, capturing the air that's in the yeast. The yeast that's in the air, sorry. The yeast that's in the air to make his breads. He makes about 10 loaves a day. He can't make more. And he also serves you a set. And this is his set on his very densely grained Austrian and German-inspired breads. So they're not all shokupan. They're not all the thick white toast. But his set is a savory set. The soup. Soup for breakfast is a very good idea. The cafes that women frequented often had a fruit salad, still do, and you can see that they were very delicately prepared. Now, breakfast sandwiches are very common in cafes, and I have two versions of the same type. One, this one is on untoasted bread, but this one is on toasted bread, and it falls into the category like the cheese toast of toast. Somerset, a Somerset in a cafe would often include ice cream. So there are special ice creams that have taken root in cafes, including kurogoma. Now, I'd love to know a recipe. Somebody's going to give me a recipe for one that really works that we can make here. This one is in a cafe in Kyoto again. And for some reason, every time I encountered kurogoma ice cream, black sesame ice cream, it was on cornflakes. And I don't know. Some things will remain a mystery, I suspect. Another place, though, serves it instead of cornflakes with Pepperidge Farm goldfish. It's lovely, adorable. But here is something more, shall we say, traditional for the Japanese cafe, which is the coffee jelly, which is exquisite, lovely, light, and perfect for a summer day. And it's very beautiful, like little jewels. And that, I do believe, was created in Japan. I mentioned Kit Kat bars. I just thought I'd show you the Kit Kat bars that refer to their seasonality and regionalism. There are some of them. So different seasons, different kinds of Kit Kat bars, and different regions, different kinds of Kit Kat bars. I'm going to give you just a couple slides of some cafes where the coffee is what matters rather than the food. And this is one where unusually, a woman is the head bar person, and she does this pour-over coffee with a Nell bag, a flannel bag held over a wire ring. You might notice the poster in the back. What's going on? Fidel playing golf. It sets the tone. The coffee's good. It's also a bike shop, by the way, it's a bike repair shop, so it's got a lot going on. But she possibly is the best coffee I've had. And this is her brew. She does not serve food. There are coffee shops in Japan where, for example, Café Doramburu in Tokyo, where Mr. Sekiguchi says, if you want food, go to a restaurant. We won't give you any food. Don't do that, I'm just going to, mostly I have coffee and sit there for a long time. But there's a new place that just opened tomorrow in Boston. And later on, I'll talk about it. But what they're doing is demonstrating latte art, which has become extremely well-organized, competitive, and very Japanese. So latte art at Ogawa's coffee shop, by the way, it is a chain that started in Kyoto, and it is now opening its first American branch. They do latte art. They're world champion latte artists. I I can't get into it myself because my hand would shake, but yesterday they served me this one, which was for cherry blossom season, because still in the north we have a few cherry blossoms. I think I've gone over time, but I think what it would be fun to do is hear from you and your experiences or any questions. And if I can't answer them, I see experts in the audience who probably can. So I'd really love to hear from you. I think there are microphones that will be passed around. If you raise your hand, I think people are going to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the lovely lecture. Can you tell us about how did the wartime affected the cafe business? The wartime during the Second World War, presumably they chose.
Well, there wasn't any coffee. I'll go back to the microphone. There wasn't any coffee available, and people really needed those places to get together, and the cafes couldn't sell them very much. They were reduced to making brews as they did in England and here with walnuts and grasses that they, edible things that they could scorch and create the color at least. But it was just a warm beverage. It was a warm, and they were also places where, people weren't eating very much. So you might be able to get some rice crackers. You might be able to get some small amount of nurturants. But mostly it was because you wanted to be with other people and check in on each other. So the coffee business didn't make it back again until the mid to late 50s, where imports started during the occupation, which ended in 52. But I can talk about the later development of the coffee industry if you want, but maybe there's other questions.
Has the big chain coffee, venti, latte to go, like sugary mocha kind of stuff come through in Japan, or is it still more of the latte and the serious black coffee kind of thing?
I'm sorry,
Like the Starbucks kind of trend of like get your humongous sweet coffee and like run down the street. Like, is that common, or is it really like it's about the place where you're at?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first went to Japan in the 60s, nobody walked down the street eating anything or drinking anything. In fact, if you go to a vending machine and you get a can of soda pop or something, you stand there and drink it and put it right into the vending machine deposit place. You don't walk down the street. So to-go coffee well, you can get it, of course. There's a couple of Japanese chains and, of course, Starbucks, which will give you coffee to go, but it's not desirable, especially because cafe is a place you want to be, and get the service and the mood and, so not so much takeout, if that was your question. Yeah. Well, I can see that our time has signaled, but maybe could we have one more? One more. I think one of you, I don't know.
I'll just talk to you, so maybe you can speak.
Wait.
How much can you charge per cup of coffee in light of that sufficient rent in Japan?
Well,
obviously, either you have to charge more than a Starbucks would do,
Oh, absolutely.
or go by the volume. You can go for volume, that kind of a coffee shop.
Yeah, the range of price for a cup of coffee is extraordinary. I mean, you can get coffee for about 180 yen at a really cheap place like Dotor or something. But I've had 2,500 yen coffee, 1 cup, in Japan. So you're renting a valuable space of property by sitting in the seat, and you might be drinking out of a Wedgwood or Limoges cup, but it's really, you're taking in an experience, So it's really hard to measure things by a cup of coffee in ordinary value terms, as it would be any eating experience. Hard to develop a standard for that. Yes, the range is enormous. They have Starbucks in Japan, yeah. Though, well, we can talk about that. It hasn't gotten in the way of the independence as much as people might have predicted. There's a rise of independence again in a kind of answer to, and maybe some nostalgia. So thank you very much. I think that does it.